Few names resonate as deeply as that of Harald the Terrible. After the bloody Battle of the Seven Teeth, Harald emerged not only as a victorious warrior, but as a changed man. It is said that in the darkest hours of the battle, he disappeared into the mist that covered the field, carrying with him only his axe and a heart full of despair. It was there, between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, that he encountered Hel, the goddess of death, seated on her throne divided between beauty and decay. The deal was sealed with blood and promises that no mortal would dare repeat. In exchange for the power to unite the lands under his rule, Harald would have to offer the goddess something precious, not just fallen warriors, but a greater sacrifice. Every decade, the firstborn of his lineage would walk to the portal where the veil between the worlds fades and pledge his allegiance to Hel. It was a pact that would ensure the glory of his name, but also the weight of a curse that would mark his family forever. When Harald returned, there was no doubt. He was more than human. His strength seemed unmatched. His eyes carried the icy glow of the underworld, and his presence silenced even the most fearless. He united the clans with a mix of diplomacy and terror, building a kingdom that seemed unbeatable. But in their castle, between celebrations and strategies, Harald's family lived in the shadow of the pact. His children, Bjorn, the fearless, and Ingrid, the wise, carried the burden of knowing that one of them would be the next tribute to the goddess. While Bjorn trained to face any enemy that challenged the kingdom, Ingrid delved into ancient texts, searching for a way to break the cycle without dishonoring the family name. Yet their relationship was complex. Harald loved them both deeply, but his determination to maintain the kingdom drove them apart. He saw his own strength in Bjorn, but feared that the young man would inherit more than his axe. Ingrid, with her cunning and independent spirit, challenged him on matters few would dare to broach. But the family's fate was inevitably intertwined with the promise made to the goddess. And deep down, Harald knew that his glory came at a price that perhaps no one would be willing to pay. The kingdom of Harald the Terrible was a place where brute force and cunning went hand in hand. At the heart of his capital, which sat on the shores of a fjord surrounded by icy mountains, stood a great wooden hall called Valstorm, where decisions were made, alliances forged, and stories told. Life in the kingdom was harsh, but it pulsed with a unique energy. From dawn onwards, the sound of forges echoed as smiths forged weapons and tools. Women, just as resilient as men, ruled the markets and coordinated harvests. Everyone had a role, for Harald believed that a strong kingdom was born from the contributions of every citizen. The customs, rooted in Norse traditions, had dark undertones, influenced by Harald's pact with Hel. Festivals, though vibrant, always included a moment of reverence for the goddess of death, symbolized by offerings left by the sea. Children were taught from an early age to respect the spirits and never to break their oaths, something Harald preached fervently. At the same time, sagas of the great deeds of the king and his warriors were sung by skalds, poets, in every corner of the kingdom, keeping pride and loyalty to the ruler alive. However, the prosperity of the kingdom also depended on constant vigilance. Patrols were sent out regularly to protect the borders, and the ports were always busy with the trade of goods and the arrival of warships. There was a peculiar mix of peaceful coexistence and constant tension. Even in the most remote villages, daily life revolved around preparation and survival. The peasants worked the fields, but always with one hand on the plow and the other on the hilt of the sword. There was a popular saying, "Under Harald's axe we find peace, but never rest." Bjorn, Harald's eldest son, was the epitome of strength and indomitable spirit. From an early age, he showed an aptitude for war, wielding a sword before he could even learn to write runes. His training was intense, often supervised by Harald himself, who saw in his son an extension of his own glory. Bjorn was the pride of the kingdom, tall, robust, with eyes that shone like ice in the sun. But behind his bravery lay a weight few knew. He knew that as the eldest son, he was destined to honor his father's pact with Hel, which made him question whether his destiny was truly his. Despite this, he was admired for his loyalty to the people and his ability to lead. Always at the head of patrols, he became an unbreakable wall against the kingdom's enemies. Ingrid, the youngest daughter, was a fascinating contrast to her brother. Intelligent and introspective, she preferred ancient texts to weapons. From an early age, Ingrid demonstrated an insatiable curiosity about the mysteries of the world and the pact that marked her family. While Bjorn trained in the fields, Ingrid spent hours in a makeshift library, collecting scrolls and talking to wise men who visited the kingdom. Her mind was sharp, and her defiant spirit often put her at odds with Harald. She believed that destiny could be rewritten and dedicated herself to finding a way to free her family from the Dark Pact. Despite this, Ingrid was also seen as the soul of the people, capable of inspiring the villagers with words as powerful as any sword. The relationship between Bjorn and Ingrid was as intense as it was complex. Bjorn admired his sister's intelligence, but often felt that her ideas put the kingdom at risk, especially when she mentioned the possibility of defying Hel. On the other hand, Ingrid saw in Bjorn an immeasurable strength, but worried about the way he accepted his destiny without questioning it. This contrast between them created a constant tension, but also an unbreakable bond. In their darkest moments, they knew they could only rely on each other, and this bond would be essential when fate finally forced them to face their family pact. On one of Harald's solitary journeys, he found himself in a remote region, an icy mountain where the storms were so intense that they seemed to test even the strength of a king like him. It was there, in the solitude of the snow and the cutting wind, that an ancient shaman awaited him, whose hair and skin were like snow itself, immersed in ancient wisdom. Harald knew that this meeting would not be like any other, but the need to consult the shaman was urgent. The pact with Hel was becoming more oppressive, and his desire to understand the true terms of this agreement consumed him. The shaman, with his serene presence and eyes that reflected the mystery of eternity, received Harald without haste. In silence, he led the king to a circle of stones, where a fire crackled softly, contrasting with the cold around him. The shaman's words, slow and considered, began to dispel the fog in Harald's mind. The blood pact is not a curse, but a choice that echoes through the generations, the shaman said, his deep voice reverberating off the mountain. Hel does not wish for the destruction of your lineage, but for the sacrifice to be made with honor and intent. The words weighed heavily on Harald, but he still felt that something more needed to be done to break the cycle of suffering. The shaman, sensing the king's doubt and uneasiness, suggested an offering to Hel, but not a simple material offering, as those made by many. Offer something that transcends gold and silver, he advised. Make an offering that is pure, from the heart. Give the goddess of death what is most precious to you, something that symbolizes your commitment to your people and to the truth. Harald, though wary of the idea, knew that he could not return empty-handed. He accepted the shaman's challenge, promising that the next offering would be a sacrifice of the spirit, not just the body. What this meant was still a mystery, but Harald was prepared to find out the truth, at any cost. The sky was overcast, tinged with a somber tone, as if even the gods sensed what was to come. On the horizon, a dense fog began to form, and the heavy atmosphere foreshadowed something strange. Harald, accustomed to listening to the winds and noticing the small signs of nature, felt a disturbing change in his kingdom. The villagers, normally resistant, began to move hurriedly, restlessly, as if something was disturbing them. It was the sign the king had feared, and he knew that time to act was running out. On the outskirts of the fjord, an unknown fleet began to approach, but it was not the usual warriors, the invaders who came to fight. This army was different. Instead of arrows and war drums, the invasion came with a more subtle strategy. The fleet was loaded with strange symbols, unknown even to the most experienced skalds, and the vessels moved with unusual precision, as if there was a supernatural coordination. A storm seemed to follow the fleet, as if the sea itself were being manipulated. Bjorn was the first to notice. Standing in one of the watchtowers, his ever-sharp eyes noticed the strange ships approaching. As he quickly descended to the center of the kingdom, he found his father, Harald, in his room, peering intently at the map spread out before him. "Something is not right," Bjorn said, his voice tense but controlled. Harald looked out over the horizon, sensing the energy of the unknown. "Brace yourselves. This is no ordinary invasion. They have not come to fight. They have come to test us." The news spread quickly throughout the kingdom. Ingrid, as always curious and meticulous, sought to understand what was happening. But she knew that her brilliant mind could not dismiss the mystical element that hung over the events. The attack did not appear to be merely physical. Something deeper was at play. Harald, with his cunning, began to prepare the kingdom for a psychological and strategic battle, aware that the real fight would be fought in the invisible fields between life and death, in the same pact that linked his lineage to hell. The tension in Harald's kingdom was palpable. The normally vibrant city was now silent, its inhabitants bracing themselves for what was to come. The invaders, with their strange vessels and mysterious symbols, had surrounded the city without launching a single attack. It was as if they were merely watching, waiting. The smell of salt in the air mingled with the sense of imminent danger. Harald's warriors were positioned on the walls, alert for any movement, but there was still no battle. Something about it all seemed orchestrated, more psychological than physical. It was then that, in the silence that dominated the city, a voice echoed across the battlefield, shattering the stillness with a powerful, contemptuous cry. "Harald, the Terrible, where is the king who makes everyone tremble?" The voice coming from the enemy was no ordinary one. There was an innate power in it, as if hell itself had spoken through it. The man who shouted was imposing, with hair as black as a moonless night, and his intense and cold eyes seemed like a deep abyss, as if his gaze were capable of consuming the soul of whoever looked at them. He was a leader who commanded respect, and his gaze made even the bravest hesitate. Harald, in his command room, heard the shout as if it were a direct challenge, but something inside him told him that this would not be an ordinary battle. He looked at Bjorn and Ingrid, both with tense expressions, and then stood up, with the calm characteristic of someone who had faced many storms. "He wants a conversation. Prepare for what is to come." Harald knew that this was not a simple exchange of words, but an opportunity to understand more about the invaders. The city was surrounded, but in his heart, Harald felt that the real fight would begin with words and not with blades. The silence before the confrontation was the prelude to what was about to happen. The leader of the invading host, towering and dark, was known as Helda, the Shadow Lord. His piercing eyes reflected the darkness of the abyss, and his aura of mystery hung about him like a storm about to break. Helda, as he approached Harald's great hall, stood proud and impassive, as if fate itself stood before the king. He knew that the words he spoke here would carry more weight than any sharp blade. "Harald the Terrible," Helda began, his voice deep and resonant. "I am not here to conquer land or riches alone. No, what I seek is something far more ancient, something that defies the very essence of death." He paused, his eyes fixed on Harald, as if each word were being measured for maximum impact. "You, Great Harald, have made a pact with the goddess Hel. I have not come to destroy your kingdom, but to expand my domain. Death, in its purest form, requires more power, more followers, and that is what I have come to seek. Your bloodline, with its direct connection to Hel, is the key to that. Halder stepped forward, as if the darkness surrounding him had come alive. You must know that there are forces beyond death that can be manipulated. I, Halder, seek those forces. And you, Harald, are the door I can open to my true reign. But know this, any resistance you offer will not only be against me, but against the very forces that rule the beyond. He smiled, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Now, decide, will you be part of my empire, or will you be remembered as the last stand before all is consumed? Harald the Terrible remained silent for a moment. His expression was unflappable, as always, but his eyes shone with the wisdom of one who had faced fate more than once. He knew that it was not the blade that would resolve this impasse, but the mind and the soul. The word, thought out with precision, could be the key to what was to come. Calmly, he answered Halder, his voice as serene as the mountain wind. You speak of death as if it were a mere play on words, Halder, but I am not foolish enough to believe that your proposal is a mere offering. Death, to me, is not a prize. It is a duty, a sacrifice that must be made only for honor. If you seek to usurp my family line to acquire what you think is power, know that you will find no ally in me. Your intention is clear, but I am the guardian of my line and of the forces you underestimate. You will never be more than an echo in the shadows. Harald stepped back, his eyes fixed on the invader. Now, withdraw from my kingdom, or your presence will be obliterated not by war, but by the very nature of the laws that govern this world. As the tension hung in the air, Harald's daughter, Ingrid, watched intently. Her keen intellect and her study of the forces beyond life had given her a deep understanding of the mysteries of the ancient world. She knew that death was not something to be defied with brute force, but with wisdom. With a calm gesture, Ingrid stepped forward, her words laden with quiet confidence. You, Halder, think you can manipulate the forces you control through ignorance, but I know the ancient truths. The dead are not toys for those who desire power without understanding. Your quest for an alliance with Hel is futile. She is not an entity to be manipulated. You have come to us seeking that which is impossible to possess, that which men will never understand, the true essence of that which lies beyond death. Ingrid made a subtle movement with her hands, and an ethereal energy began to emanate from her body. I banish your presence now, Halder, and may the currents of Hel lead you back to what you truly are, a being who does not understand what he defies. With that, a beam of light, cold and intense, enveloped Halder, making him retreat. Ingrid had used her knowledge of ancient rituals to summon a protective force, a barrier that kept him away without harming him. Halder, perplexed, saw his power repelled by the pure wisdom of Harald's daughter. After the invading troops had withdrawn, the biting wind that had enveloped Harald's kingdom began to calm. The tension in Harald the Terrible's lands was easing, but something remained in the air. The silence of the empty battlefield seemed to carry an invisible weight, a sense that the great conflict was not yet resolved. The inhabitants of Harald felt victory, but not peace. Ingrid, her mind always alert, watched the horizon with a serious, almost distant expression. She knew that, even though Halder's troops had retreated, the real challenge was yet to come. Her reading of the ancient texts and the rituals she had studied indicated that Halder's presence was not a simple attack. His arrival, the threats of power, all indicated that something much greater was at stake. It was then that she approached her father, who was resting beside the furnace, and said, in a voice that carried wisdom beyond his years. "Father, what happened here was only a warning. Harald did not come for simple conquest, but for something much deeper. His desire for control over death is not just ambition. He seeks something that defies balance. You must go to the coldest mountain, to the highest peak, where the winds cut and the solitude is absolute. Only there, at the top of the world, will it be possible to do what needs to be done." Harald, who always had a firm and unbeatable gaze, stared at Ingrid with a serenity that was difficult to decipher. He knew the weight of her words. What Ingrid was suggesting was not simple. She was not asking for just a physical sacrifice, but something much deeper, something that would challenge Harald's very essence. He looked at her, with a shine that reflected the understanding of what was at stake. The pact with Hel, the challenges of his lineage, and the winds of death that were now blowing stronger, all converged on this moment. "Ingrid," he said, his voice filled with implacable calm, "I knew we would come to this. I know what must be done, but I also know that the decision is not simple. What you ask of me, daughter, is not just an act of courage, but of renunciation. Death, the goddess who rules our souls, demands more than an offering. She demands a commitment. And if my sacrifice is what will ensure peace for the kingdom and my lineage, then I will do whatever is necessary." With one last look at his daughter, Harald stood, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as a sense of inevitability took hold of his being. The icy mountain, with its treacherous peaks, awaited him. The fate of his people depended on the sacrifice he was about to make. Ingrid knew that her father would never return the same, but at the same time, she understood that this was the only way to ensure that the story of Harald the Terrible would become a legend that would never be forgotten. The wind cut through Harald's skin like sharp blades, but he felt no pain. The cold of that mountain, the highest peak in all the lands he dominated, seemed to embrace the solitude of his destiny. The sky, in a somber tone, reflected the gravity of that moment. Harald the Terrible was no longer the man who had known the glories of battles or the victories of his people. He was now facing a power beyond the comprehension of mortals, ready to fulfill the last step of a pact that had begun long before his birth. He descended to the great stone hall, where his children awaited him, and the silence that hung between them was dense. Bjorn, with his firm and proud gaze, approached his father. His eyes, so similar to Harald's, reflected the pain of a farewell that could not be avoided. Ingrid, with her serene countenance and understanding soul, remained further away, observing with the eyes of wisdom that she had always shown. Harald knelt before his children. He knew he would not return. His journey, now, was a lonely one with no return. "Bjorn, Ingrid," he said, his voice soft but filled with unshakable strength. "The kingdom you will inherit will be free of the burden I carry. I leave you with my love, my strength, and my honor. May Ingrid's wisdom and Bjorn's courage guide this kingdom to a future where the darkness of death no longer haunts us." Bjorn, with characteristic strength, embraced his father, wordlessly feeling the gravity of the moment. Ingrid, on the other hand, simply looked at him with a look of deep understanding, as if she already knew what was coming next. She held Harald's hands gently, and her words were like a whisper but filled with power. "May your offering be accepted, Father. May you find peace in eternity and leave us the strength to follow your path." Without another word, Harald walked away, climbing the icy mountain, his body prepared for what was to come. The highest peak awaited him, a place of absolute silence where the wind seemed to carry voices from beyond. Upon reaching the top, he knelt before the stone altar, an ancient place imbued with primordial energy, where the ancients had once made pacts with the goddess Hel. With a firm heart, he looked up at the sky, letting the snow fall upon him. Hel, the goddess of death, appeared before him, shrouded in a cloak of shadows. "Harald the Terrible," she said, her voice echoing in his soul. "You come in the name of what you wish to save. Your sacrifice is not only your life, but the future of your lineage. I accept your offering, but know that your journey will not be in vain." Harald closed his eyes and, with one last deep breath, surrendered his soul, fulfilling the pact. The earth trembled beneath his feet, and the sky lit up with a golden dawn. His lineage, his kingdom, were free from the clutches of evil, but he was no longer among the living. His presence, however, remained as a legend, an echo in the icy mountain wind. And so, the kingdom of Harald the Terrible was reborn under a new mantle of peace and prosperity, where the shadows of death no longer threatened his lineage. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.